Legendary conservative lawyer and top Fox News legal analyst Andy McCarthy brutally excoriated the Trump administration in a series of back-to-back legal analyses about Trump's lawfare against Democrats and the war crimes and murder that the Trump administration likely committed in the Caribbean. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, as you know, one of the things I like to do, because I think it's just generally more effective, is to use the right against the right. The right is cultish and often disinclined to listen to any liberal, progressive, or people who are not like in the Trump-aligned orbit. So it's always good to use conservatives against conservatives if and when there is deviation. Andy McCarthy is a legendary conservative. He's more aligned with Trump than Biden, with Republicans than Democrats. And yet he still will, from time to time, criticize the Trump administration and Trump for their excesses and abuses. And so I want to dive into some of this, okay? So the first article is Military Lawfare is a Red Line. Incorporating the Pentagon into the campaign against political enemies, even those who make a craven video, raises the abuse of executive power to a new level. Mark Kelly and the Seditious Six sounds like a bad lounge act. That, at any rate, is how I decided to treat it, which is to say, ignore it. After all, it's Thanksgiving. As we enter the holiday season, it's time not just for good cheer, but introspection. How blessed we are to be alive at a time of such abundance. It shouldn't be the occasion for this week's 3rd or 10th or whatever episode of Trump-era Sound and Fury. But it is. This one, you've no doubt heard, involves half a dozen Democratic lawmakers who starred in a craven but legally unimpeachable video reminding our troops that they shouldn't obey illegal orders. I have to say remind because it's already been drilled into our troops, the best trained fighting force in the world, more thoroughly tutored in their legal and ethical duties than any fighting force in history, that the Uniform Code of Military Justice, the UCMJ, obliges them to disregard orders that are manifestly unlawful. And that's also why I say that the video was craven act, particularly on the part of Senator Kelly of Arizona. Although it appears that Senator Alyssa Slotkin of Michigan orchestrated the video, Kelly has become the central figure. Slotkin is a former CIA analyst and Defense Department bureaucrat, not an officer. Of the 6 lawmakers, including military veterans, only Kelly, a Navy captain, retired from the military as a senior officer. He is thus subject to recall and remains bound by the UCMJ. Now, let's not get deep into every constitutional patch here. To my mind, members of Congress should not be subject to executive control. The specter of punitively applying the UCMJ to Kelly effectively does that. But that's an issue for another day. For the moment, the point is that Kelly knows he should stay a million miles away from a stunt like this video. And again, the reason I'm pointing this out is to point out that Andy McCarthy is not a liberal. He's not a progressive. He's not saying, hell yeah, Senator Mark Kelly, good job reminding people that they shouldn't break the law. He has to go out of his way to poo-poo it, say, no, he shouldn't have done it. It's craven, it's cowardly, says Andy McCarthy, who, to my knowledge, is not a veteran, to a decorated veteran. But I digress. That's not because it was criminal. It wasn't. The theatrical rage of the president and his apparatchiks notwithstanding. It's because the video was a politicization of our armed forces at a time when we desperately need them to be kept out of the political fray. And as Kelly knows, when Democrats poke another hole in another norm, the president's MO is to drive a truck through it. So there again, this is where McCarthy concedes, okay, I pick on the Democrats, they break norms, but Donald Trump is objectively worse. They poke a hole in it, Trump drives a truck through it, and thus what Trump does is objectively worse. I love it. I love to see conservatives admit, however reluctantly, that Donald Trump is morally inferior, more unscrupulous, more corrupt, and more violative of democratic norms than any Democrat. When it comes to military effectiveness, few things rival the chain of command. Orders are thus presumptively legal. Because combat is innately enveloped in a gray area, U.S. soldiers and sailors are expected to follow orders unless it's patently obvious that the orders are illegal. Say, hypothetically, an order to kill a prisoner in custody, or a peacetime order to kill a non-combatant who has posed no threat. Consequently, it's unhelpful at best to admonish the armed forces to resist unlawful orders. As Kelly knows, troops are supposed to presume that orders are lawful. So if you want to establish that an order is unlawful, you need to be specific and persuasive. What order are you contending is illegal, and on what basis do you contend that it's so plain that the order should be disobeyed? In this special context, anything else is potentially disruptive. It may tend to undermine discipline and cohesion. Now let's be clear, disruptive is not a synonym for illegal, much less criminal. We seem to have lost our grip on such formerly unremarkable distinctions. Thanks to years of politicized law enforcement, we've become inured to a two-tiered system in which the party in power uses court processes to punish its opposition. True to his nature, when Democrats light a fire, Trump raises it to a conflagration, again conceding that Trump is morally inferior and objectively worse. Hence, Trump has sicked the FBI on the 6 Democratic lawmakers, and he's doing so even as his Republican congressional allies inveigh that the FBI's perusal of their phone records, in connection with the scheme to obstruct Congress's constitutional duty to ratify 2020 electoral votes, was a separation of powers outrage for which they expect the taxpayers to enrich them to the tunes of millions of dollars. Great point. Simultaneously, Trump is saying, hey, listen, the FBI, they didn't have any right to look at phone records of Republican lawmakers as I attempted and they attempted to steal the 2020 election. How dare you? You can't do that. But also the FBI should be able to investigate Democratic lawmakers for reminding the military that they should follow the law and not obey illegal orders. The hypocrisy is rich because, again, it's not about principle. It's only about power. Trump also has the Pentagon rattling its sabers about a possible court-martial of Kelly. That's even more egregious. There's no basis for a criminal investigation, civilian or military. The core of First Amendment free speech is political dissent. Even willfully incorrect statements of the law would not be prosecutable if the speech at issue is political in nature. The Democrats' video is not just political speech, it's political speech by members of Congress, whom the executive branch has no business investigating in the absence of blatant crime unrelated to legislative functions. Far from willfully incorrect, moreover, the statements that our troops should not obey unlawful orders were legally sound. As we've seen, it can be complicated assessing how manifestly illegal an order must be before it can be confidently disregarded, but that's a basis for debate, not prosecution. What's truly bizarre is to find the president, who likes to remind us that he's the nation's chief law enforcement official, grossly misstating the law while claiming the seditious 6 are dangerously misstating the law, when in fact they've accurately stated the law. As one of the few current or former prosecutors in the United States to have actually charged and convicted people for seditious conspiracy, I'm here to tell you that at the heart of any sedition offense is that, quote, the use of force against the nation or its government. Section 2384 of federal criminal law defines the crime as conspiring to levy war against the United States or to forcibly destroy the government, prevent the execution of the law, or seize government property. The military law definition is even narrower. To be guilty, one must join in creation of a, quote, revolt, violence, or other disturbance against government authority, quote, with intent to cause the overthrow or destruction of that authority. Nothing on the Democrats' video comes close to urging or promoting violence. Indeed, in comparison to Trump's fiery lip speech prior to the Capitol riot, which did also not cross the burdensome legal threshold of incitement, the lawmaker's video is vanilla. So again, what McCarthy's saying is, hey, listen, you know me, I didn't think that Trump's speech before January 6th, the January 6th riot, meant that he should be prosecuted. But even compared to that, what the Democrats did wasn't anywhere near as bad as what Trump did. Again, Trump is objectively, morally inferior. He's objectively worse. If Kelly had been urging his fellow military members to disobey lawful orders, that would be insubordination, not sedition. But he wasn't. So even if he had done the things that liars like Donald Trump and his Republican Party say that he did, that still wouldn't be sedition. It would be insubordination. The Democrats' disruptive remarks might be cause for concern, not alarm, but some concern, if they had been really directed at our armed forces. But they weren't. This was an attempt at striking the right balance between anti-Trump red meat for the Democratic base and an effective national security message aimed at the country writ large. Kelly, Slotkin, et al. Are trying to convey that, A, we're not all woke wackos, we've actually got combat veterans and intelligence operatives who fought this nation's enemies, and B, but we would be more responsible stewards of our national defense than the current commander-in-chief, who's reckless and, on occasion, lawless. The problem is that the Democrats' lack of courage of their supposed convictions. I suppose they're obliquely implying that it's unlawful for Trump to order drone strikes without congressional authorization or enemy provocation that, as of this writing, have obliterated 21 ships on the high seas off South and Central America and are estimated to have killed 83 people. Are the 6 Democrats saying that a drone operator who is ordered to kill the non-combatants operating those ships should disobey such an order? That would be a specific and debate worth having. It would also be controversial and politically risky. Regular readers will not be surprised to hear that I believe the drone attacks are illegal. See here, 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 and he hyperlinks, and we'll get to that, because he has a lot to say about the recent developments. But after years of the Justice Department's rationalizing of similarly edgy presidential lethal force orders, in the absence of their either congressional authorization or any military threat against the United States, I'm not sure my view would carry the day among scholars, in Congress or in the courts. That being the case, I find it highly doubtful that a military officer could confidently disobey an order to carry out an attack. I do fear that our troops are pawns in the political game. If Democrats reclaim the House and impeach Trump, they and their media allies will suddenly claim the drone strikes were patently illegal, creating potential legal jeopardy for officers who sincerely believe they are executing lawful orders. Alas, the 6 Democrats want to hint that the order should be disobeyed, but they won't say so outright because this is about politics, not courage or honor. Their calculation is that the drone strikes, the killing of what the administration calls our narco-terrorists, are popular even if wrong. Beyond that, Democrats just want to bray that Trump is lawless without explaining how. It would thus be better for all concerned if they zip it and keep the troops out of it until they've got something helpful rather than demagogic to contribute. Last point. As Trump watches his poll numbers plummet, it either doesn't dawn on him or he just doesn't care that he's in office, in part because the voting public was unnerved by Democratic lawfare. Clearly, Trump's status mismanagement of the economy is his biggest problem, as it was for Biden's. But lawfare, also a problem for Biden, is a bigger problem for Trump. So again, McCarthy concedes. McCarthy believes that President Biden engaged in lawfare against Donald Trump. I reject that, but that's McCarthy's belief. And even here he's conceding that Trump is objectively worse, that he's engaging in more frequent lawfare and more egregious lawfare with less basis. Biden and his Justice Department officials knew enough to pretend, indignantly, that they would never politicize law enforcement. While they drew the line at insulting the public's intelligence, Trump and his minions revel in lawfare. That further normalizes the noxious practice, potentially entrenching it. Trump is also handing Democrats the articles of impeachment they will swiftly enact if, as seems increasingly likely, his erratic governance hands them back the House next year, and maybe even the Senate, the way things are going. On that score, a terrible omen. Incorporating the Pentagon into the lawfare campaign against political enemies raises the abuse of executive power to a new level. Trump's 2020 Stop the Steal machinations, while impeachable, were half-baked and impossible to take seriously as a coup attempt because they did involve the armed forces. For Trump to begin pulling the military he commands into his ongoing, punitive use of government processes against his partisan opponents is a red line. Justice Department lawfare is bad, but the courts are equipped to handle it. Politicization of the military is a different, more threatening beast. So that is Fox News lawyer Andy McCarthy going ham on Trump. Now, we're not going to read the others in super in-depth fashion because it's just too much. We'll be here for 40 more minutes, but I encourage you to check them out. We intended the strike to be lethal is not a defense. This is Andy McCarthy laying into the bombshell Washington Post report that Pete Hegseth effectively ordered that survivors of a unilateral, unprovoked strike on a shipping boat off the coast of Venezuela be hit with a double tap to kill the survivors. Okay, so again, we're just going to read parts of this. He goes, if this happened, as described in the Post report, it was at best a war crime under federal law. I say at best because, as regular readers know, I believe the attacks on suspected drug boats without congressional authorization, under circumstances in which the boat operators pose no military threat to the United States, and given that narcotics trafficking is defined in federal law as a crime rather than terrorist activity, much less an act of war, are lawless, and therefore that killings are not legitimate under the law or armed conflict. Nevertheless, even if we stipulate arguendo that the administration has a colorable claim that our forces are in an armed conflict with non-state actors, the laws of war do not permit the killing of combatants who have been rendered out of the fighting, including by shipwreck. To reiterate, I don't accept that the ship operators are enemy combatants, even if one overlooks that the administration has not proven that they're drug traffickers or members of designated foreign terrorist organizations. There's no armed conflict. They may be criminals if it is proven that they're importing illegal narcotics, but they are not combatants. My point, nevertheless, is that even if you buy the untenable claim that they are combatants, it is a war crime to intentionally kill combatants who have been rendered unable to fight. It is not permitted under the laws and customs of honorable warfare to order that no quarter be given, to apply lethal force to those who surrender or those who are injured, shipwrecked, or otherwise unable to fight. According to the Post, two unidentified forces said prior to the September 2nd attack that killed at least 11 people, that Pete Hegseth gave a spoken directive, which one source described as, quote, the order was to kill everybody. And then it goes into how Hegseth was denying about this and how the denials and explanations make legal sense. Neither Hegseth's statement nor the explanation attributed to Bradley makes legal sense. The laws of war, as they're incorporated into federal law, make lethal force unlawful if it is used under certain circumstances. Hence, it cannot be a defense to say, as Hegseth does, that one has killed because one's objective was, quote, lethal kinetic strikes. Moreover, if an arguable combatant has been rendered out of fighting, targeting him with lethal force cannot be rationalized, as Bradley is said to have done, by theorizing that it was possible, at some future point, that the combatant could get help and then be able to contribute once again to enemy operations. And he goes on to cite the Geneva Conventions. He goes on to say this includes persons who have been wounded in an attack or shipwrecked. If that were not obvious enough on its face, Jack Goldsmith, who headed the Justice Department's Office of Legal Counsel in the Bush 43 administration, notes that the DoD Law of War Manual defines force de combat, again, being out of the fighting, to include persons, quote, otherwise incapacitated by shipwreck. So these people should have been protected from a murder and a war crime, okay? I don't mean to be melodramatic, but the penalty for war crimes violation is life imprisonment or death if the criminal act results in death. Finally, I would observe that, again, if the Post is accurate, Hegseth and his commanders changed the protocols after the September attack to, quote, emphasize rescuing suspected smugglers if they survive strikes. This is why 2 survivors in a subsequent strike on October 16th were captured and then repatriated to their native countries. This was a ludicrous outcome. Under prior policy, the boat would have been interdicted, the drugs seized, and the operators transferred to federal court for prosecution and hefty sentences. Under the Trump administration's policy, if the operators survive our missiles, they get to go back home and rejoin the drug trade. But put that aside. The point is that if the administration's intent to apply lethal force were a defense to killing shipwrecked suspected drug traffickers, the policy wouldn't have been changed. It was changed because Hegseth knows he can't justify killing boat operators who survive attacks, and he sends them home rather than detaining them as enemy combatants, because similarly, there is no armed conflict. There is no basis to detain them as enemy combatants. This is a very serious matter. The administration's defense can't be that, quote, we killed them because our plan is to use lethal force. So, folks, this is brutal. Okay, and again, there's a subsequent one as well. Andy McCarthy, this is a top Fox News legal analyst, a legendary conservative lawyer who hates Democrats, who hates Joe Biden, who hates Barack Obama. And he is, once again, ripping Trump a new one because Trump objectively sucks. In the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments.